Hello everyone, this is Thomas, and today we're talking about one of my favorite topics, product management. You know, one of the biggest challenges as a product manager is figuring out what to build on a daily basis. You've got ideas coming at you from all different directions, your customers, the CEO, the board, your colleagues, your friends, and yes, even your mom. And of course, you have your own ideas, so how do you reconcile all these different perspectives and figure out what exactly to build? Well, to do this, we need a systematic way of selecting which ideas to focus on and which ones to let go. And today, we'll go through an exercise to address these questions and help you and your team make better priority decisions. The exercise is designed to fit on a single whiteboard or a piece of paper, and this is something I do regularly whenever I'm trying to get my mind wrapped around a specific product and determine whether it's something we should invest more time and energy in. I hope you find this exercise as useful as I do. But before we dive in, there are a few caveats. One, we're going to keep things simple. For now, we'll only consider the choice of adding a new feature to an existing product. We will not address all the things you might consider when you're building an entirely new product and potentially even an entirely new company from scratch. However, I hope to address those topics in the future, so keep an eye out for those videos. In the meantime, all the same principles apply. You can think of the approach we use here today as a starting point or subset of the larger endeavor of building an entire product. The second caveat is that we'll leverage principles from lean startup. So I'm assuming you're already familiar with things like product market fit, hypothesis testing, and MVPs. If you're not familiar with lean startup, I strongly recommend Googling it and getting yourself up to speed. Just get the audiobook and listen to it during your morning commute. You should be able to plow through it in just a few days. In the meantime, let's get to work. So to help put things in context, I'd like to use a real-world example, which I've drawn up here on the whiteboard. And I'm going to use the Facebook newsfeed for this example, since pretty much everyone is familiar with it, at least from a user perspective. However, for this exercise, let's pretend we're product managers at Facebook, and we're responsible for deciding which features go into the newsfeed product. Furthermore, let's teleport ourselves back to the year 2015 when at this point in time, Facebook was receiving lots of user requests for a dislike button. The most common complaint was that the like button doesn't make sense for certain types of posts. For example, it doesn't feel appropriate to like a post about a tragic event such as an earthquake. Nobody really likes earthquakes. But many people are opposed to the idea of a dislike button, so instead someone suggests a different solution. What if we allow users to react to newsfeed stories with emojis? In fact, Facebook ultimately did launch emojis the following year in 2016. It's now known as their reactions feature. But again, let's pretend it's 2015 when this feature doesn't yet exist, and it's our job as product managers to determine what changes, if any, should be made to the like button. So, is this idea of using emojis a good one? Should we add this feature to the newsfeed product? And where do we start? Well, to start, there are three things we need to sort out: value proposition, alignment, and proof. First, with the value proposition, we need to clearly identify the need or problem we're trying to solve and for whom we're trying to solve it. Essentially, who is the customer and what is their specific need? We should also know how big this need really is, and by big, I don't necessarily mean the market size. The addressable market could be quite small in the beginning, but perhaps that small set of customers has a really big need. This is typically better than chasing a big market segment with a small need. Second, we need to verify alignment. Here we simply need to confirm that the feature aligns with our company mission, our strengths, and our business model. It sounds obvious, but I'm constantly surprised how many things get launched that don't pass this simple test. Lastly, we need proof, starting with proof of demand, or more specifically, what our customers do that signals the demand for this feature. These need to be measurable actions. Actions speak louder than words. We can't simply rely on what customers say in a survey or a focus group. I know it's hard to believe, but what people say doesn't always align with what they do. Finally, we need proof of fit. And by that I mean we need some initial proof that the feature actually satisfies the customer need. If during our initial test, lots of people are eager to try the feature, but the feedback is negative or very few people become repeat users, it could be a sign that there's strong demand for the feature, but poor fit. In other words, it's not simply enough that customers want the feature. Our company must deliver that feature in such a way that customers are delighted by the experience. This is an incredibly hard thing to get right, especially in the beginning. But we're not looking for perfection at this early stage. We just need some evidence that we're on the right track before dumping more time and money into the project. Okay, so that's a quick summary of what we'll cover today. Now, using this as a guide, we'll dive deeper into our Facebook example. We'll walk through it step by step, starting with the value proposition. And hopefully this gives you the context you need to apply this exercise to your own product or service. So let's get started. Okay, let's get started with customers. And remember, for this emoji feature, that's there's the user is posting content to their Facebook newsfeed, and then someone can react to it using the emojis. So the two primary customers, at least in terms of the value exchange, right, are the posters and the viewers. Now, there's other ways to go about a more fine-grained approach to defining your customers using personas and actually getting into attributes like age and gender and lifestyle and occupation and location. Or in the case of Facebook, you might delineate between a person and a business. Businesses can have accounts, right? They can post content, and of course, businesses advertise, and advertisers are the way that advertising is how Facebook makes money. So advertisers are also a customer. But for now, we're just going to focus on the interaction related to the feature, the emoji feature itself. And within that, the viewers are clearly kind of the primary user, right? They're the one that's actually selecting the emoji. So let's focus on them first. And now moving on to needs and problems, when we look at the viewers, a little bit more context, like why are they even why are they even in the newsfeed? And they're there because they want to see what's going on, right? What's going on in their network or in the world. With that, they're expecting to get relevant content, right? Relevant because it matters to some other people in their network, or relevant because it aligns with my interests. So that kind of personalization is something that we expect from Facebook. And then, of course, we have related to the emojis is this need to express my opinions or feelings. And this is something, again, we were getting this feedback from our users, and we need to think about actually, like, where are we getting this? I'm just kind of intuiting on why we use Facebook and what we might expect the viewers' problems or needs to be. But there actually is data, right? We need to be more objective about it and look at the various customer feedback and data sources. And I started here kind of at the bottom in terms of intuition and my own personal experience using Facebook. We could also, insider perspectives, other people on our team or other people in my circles that could get their own personal experiences. There's market research, there's like professional market research firms that do studies, and there's your own market research of just kind of Googling things. And then, you have the outbound channels of surveys and focus groups that can often uncover these kinds of opinions or things that aren't really obvious in through these other channels. But I really want to focus on the top three here, which are your inbound channels, things like App Store reviews, Twitter, and help desk. And of course, your analytics or your behavioral data. If you have an existing product out there, you can see what users are using and what they're not. But most importantly, customer interviews. And customer interviews are kind of like focus groups, but they're more personal, right? They're set up to kind of test specific parts of a prototype, an early version of a product, and get feedback from a user, or maybe it's an existing product, and you're doing these one-on-one interviews to kind of tease out things that are sometimes not obvious in some of these other sources. Especially, I think, in this case when you're talking about feelings and things emoting through this medium. The interviews seem like the best way to kind of uncover what the user really wants, needs, what kind of problems they may have with this type of feature. It would be hard to, I think, uncover that from analytics itself, but we will use the analytic and behavioral data, I think, later when we get to measurement. So in reality, you're going to want to enumerate further. I just kind of summarize quickly some of the user needs, but don't, like spend some time here, right? You could identify potentially dozens of things, and obviously there's a whole bunch of stuff outside of the scope of this discussion. Clearly one of the needs that users of Facebook have is data and privacy, and there's a lot of controversy, discussion around this right now, and Facebook is coming under a lot of scrutiny for its practices, deservedly so. I'm not going to go into that part of it. It doesn't really, I think, affect the conversation. I'm just using Facebook as an example here so we can kind of get our mind wrapped around this framework. But obviously, if people are expressing their feelings or emotions, like that's data, and that data could be sensitive in some way, and that need or that should be accounted for here. But that's a separate feature, a separate part of the product to ensure the security of the data and the user privacy. It's not related directly to the emoji feature, but I don't want to ignore it because it is important. So moving along, so that covers viewers, and now we have, and just on this last one here, we have with regard to this feelings, I've outlined here in story form. You see this; it's very common. It's an agile practice, and I think it's a really good one. It's kind of hard to define hundreds of features in this way, but when you pinpoint, when you get down to ones that really seem to matter, I think writing them out in this way is a very good way to kind of clarify and make sense in simple terms of what problem you're addressing. And in this case, we say, as a viewer, I want a dislike button. Remember, that was the original request. So the user is actually sort of prescribing or suggesting a solution, but they're also telling you why, right? And so as a viewer, I want a dislike button so that I can better express my feelings. So that summarizes really this core need that we're trying to get at. And if we kind of take that further and we say, okay, well, what feelings? And again, this is where customer interviews come into play, because you say, all right, you want to express feelings or sentiment, more explicitly. What does that mean? Which emotions come into play? Like, when would you use them? And so we can take this idea of feelings or emotions and kind of map them to emojis. Like, you have emotions: happy, sad, mad, amazed, shocked, frustrated. You may think something's funny, and you got to map those into emojis. And so when it comes time to build something, when you actually design it, your designers need to know what are the primary emotions. Is it a dozen? Is it 3? Is it 10? Is it 5? So, and which ones are they? And you may not get it right initially. Users, you may identify 7 to 10 emotions that they like to be able to express. Kind of feels like a lot, and so maybe the designers, pare that down to something a little bit more manageable. So that said, we kind of have this idea of what the problem is, and how it aligns with the user and the customer need, and some idea of how we might build something that we could test. So of course we also have posters. There's two sides to this. The person who's actually posting the content, they have needs as well, and obviously they're posting the content. There's this kind of underlying human need to share things, but they really want people to care, right? So when you share something, you're hoping to get some sort of response, and this idea that users, the viewers, have more ways of responding, and they have a sort of a richer set of reactions that they can go to, aside from comments and likes and all the other kind of normal types of engagement, that's potentially appealing to posters as well. So we're going to use this idea of engagement as a proxy for caring, or this response to a post, and we've identified here kind of what the various engagement types are. We have traditionally we have views and likes and comments. And comments are probably the richest kind of form of engagement, right? It requires the most energy and thought. But we also have things like saves and reshares, and then emojis. So emojis kind of fit into this, I think, what we think is a positive type of engagement. There's also negative types of engagement. Users can flag posts for spam or something inappropriate. They can unfollow a person, or they can even unfriend them, which is the most severe. So we've identified here now within, I think, our value proposition, the customers, the needs, like why it's important, And then there's the matter of size, or how big is this? And obviously this is a feature that it's the newsfeed, right? And it's the like button within the newsfeed. So we're talking, it's very much the core of Facebook's product and platform. And so size is not really an issue in terms of market size. I think it's more of a matter of how big of a problem this is. Is this something, or how big of a need is this? Is this something that users really want? And we don't really know. But again, in customer interviews and some of these sources, maybe we have enough inbound requests coming through our help desk that indicate this is a big need. But we're going to test it. I think when we get later on into this experiment loop, how big that need is something we're going to want to cover. If it's a big need, we should see traction on this feature pretty early on in that process. So that covers the value proposition, and now I think we'll move on to alignment before we get into this last section, what has to do with proof. And alignment, again, this is an existing product, so and an existing business, so we should be able to kind of hit this alignment piece pretty quickly. Like, you should have a mission, you should have an idea what your strengths are, and you should have an idea of what your business model is. Now, if you're a very early stage startup, you may not really have a mission, or you may not have a business model. So you may even skip this step altogether, and that's okay. But as your organization matures, you've probably raised some money. You need to have an idea of what your mission is. You need to have a stake in the ground. You need to at least have some aspirational idea of what your strengths are, what they will be, the types of things that you're good at. And you need to have an idea of how you're going to make money. So, this is a very good exercise early on, even if you're an early stage company, to make sure that you're focusing on things that make sense given your outlook for your business. And with regard to the Facebook mission, they have these 5 very kind of clear things. While bringing the world closer together is a little bit nebulous, but building communities, keeping people connected, this idea of self-expression, and discovering what's going on. So, these things, clearly self-expression aligns with what we're talking about here today for emojis. It may not always be such a direct correlation with the feature or product you're building and your mission. You might have to spend some more time here to connect those dots, but you need to do that early on. If you can't connect the dots between a product, your feature, and your mission, maybe you have the wrong mission. But if you believe in your mission and it's been around for a while and it's something you've all bought into, you probably are, off on a tangent, with the feature or even the customer or market, whatever. So that test is really important. I think people tend to overlook it. But getting in then to the strengths on the alignment, you need to understand what you're really like, how you're going to win, what are your core assets. In the case of Facebook, to me at least, I think it's network effects clearly are a huge strength. It's a huge asset, and the fact that all of your friends, all of your family are on Facebook makes it very hard for people to switch. The reach, just the massive scale of Facebook, obviously is a huge strength and advantage. But I think as it relates to this feature, data is clearly, this expression of feelings, this emoji is going to generate a new form of data and a more explicit opinion or explicit sentiment regarding some piece of content, and that is valuable data, which Facebook can feed into. I think I have this idea that Facebook is kind of built on this human algorithm, although there are real software algorithms. They're leveraging human reactions to things to get data and getting data from that, and that's really kind of how the intelligence of Facebook really works. So it's computer algorithms and human as us as sort of participants in this process, which creates all this really valuable data. And then of course, with regard to the business model, that data can be used for advertising, and we can see of course advertisers are a customer here. So would you build this if it was only beneficial to advertisers? I certainly hope not. And actually, I don't believe Facebook really does that. They may have made some missteps here, but I do believe that it really starts with the value here, and then the monetization piece is another piece that you fit in. But I may be a bit naive in that. So anyway, that covers alignment. So we've done value proposition and alignment, and now proof. Proof is probably the hardest part. At least I think this is where people get stuck in how you might go about really testing your ideas here. And so let's start with the hypothesis. And the hypothesis is really kind of the driving piece of this experiment loop. And experiments are how we get proof. It's how we really test our ideas, and it's really how we kind of discover what the real product is, right? So we kind of start with one idea, but it's only through repeated iteration and design changes and missteps and misunderstandings of really not just the product, but maybe who the customer is. And it's through that learning process that that the product really kind of reveals itself. So we start this process really with a hypothesis, and we have a lot of data here that's come in. We have customers that are kind of telling us they want this thing, but how will we know whether it's actually working or that it's actually having a positive impact on our business? And so we want to create hypotheses that describe our predictions of how this feature will kind of change things, like how it will impact the world or our business. And I think again here, like in all things, you should spend more time enumerating. I've only come up with kind of 2 hypotheses here, but usually you'll come up with tens, dozens potentially, and then kind of narrow that down. But in that process, you'll come up with all kinds of ones that maybe don't make sense, or they just they're not really that important, and that's okay. That's part of the process. It's very rare that you're gonna just have your initial hypothesis is the thing that really kind of gets at how you're going to measure your success in this experiment loop. So I'm going to start off with kind of a normal type of hypothesis, and that is that emojis will cause a decrease in likes or comments. And so another way to think about this is hypothesis is pretty sure it's just a Latin word for guess. It's kind of a fancy word, but you really need to think of it more like assumptions, right? So if we do this, what assumptions do you have about what will happen, what the outcome will be, the reaction? And one of the assumptions is that, but we say that there would be a decrease in the existing engagement forms of likes and comments, is based on the idea that we're building something new that could steal essentially engagement from the other existing forms of engagement. And that's a perfectly reasonable assumption. And so this hypothesis it makes sense, and it's something that you can test. But I guess the ultimate question is whether the hypothesis ultimately answers this question or helps you answer this question: should we build this feature? And so if the hypothesis is true or false, it should kind of clearly indicate a yes or no on this question of should we build it. And emojis, in this case, if they decrease the engagement in likes or comments, that could be a bad thing, or it could be a good thing because maybe the overall engagement is higher. And I think that's where the second hypothesis kind of comes in, is that emojis will drive an increase in overall engagement. And now, if that's something that if we test and we see that there's an overall increase in engagement, then we can say yes, we should build this. Now, if we see that there's really a decrease in overall engagement, then maybe we shouldn't build it and just stick with what was working. So that's kind of how hypotheses work. Now, often when you're going through this process, you're going to come up with something, like in this case of overall engagement. It needs more definition, right? So we as marketers often have this idea of what engagement is, but we need to define really clearly what it is if we're going to measure it. So that's where these engagement types come into play. And I suspect Facebook has some engagement, comprehensive engagement metric, or you might hear like it's called a synthetic metric. If you're a baseball fan, these things are called saber metrics. But it's actually a combination of things that you can measure kind of globbed into one larger measurement, and you need to figure out like how to weight them, how to what is this composite metric of overall engagement, like how do you calculate it? And so that's where your hypothesis, in order to test it, we need measurement. And so that takes us into kind of this really important part of our proof, in that we need to be able to define those metrics and then measure some sort of baseline of where we're at today. And then when we launch this new version of this new feature, then we can see is there a lift or was there a decline in that relative to that baseline. So in this case, there's many different ways to go about this, and I love your suggestions in the comments if you think of something better. But the way I was thinking about it is that you could just take your existing engagement, and from this, I'm going to just choose views, likes, comments as the most relevant forms of engagement to include in our metrics. So we will measure against these relative to these other kind of 3 types of engagement. I'm going to, just for simplicity, ignore the rest, although there may be a better way to do it, or a more comprehensive way to do it. So just focusing on views, likes, and comments, what we would do is just take 3 months, 6 months, a year. Facebook's got a ton of data, so the amount of data really wouldn't be a problem. I think it's probably just how much you can deal with at one given time. When you are pulling data like this, accounting for things like seasonality, there's ups and downs, just natural ups and downs, things around holidays and just weather and things like that. So, we need to, I think a year is probably the safest thing to do, and even if that's a really large data set, you can subsample from it. So you're still kind of covering a year, but you have, you don't have billions of data points to hash through. Maybe you have something smaller, but still statistically significant. In any case, a year's worth of data I think makes sense, and what we want to do is measure the ratio of these other forms of engagement. So we have, let's just say when we look at the data, we see 25 views for every 5 likes and for every 1 comment. So that's the ratio of views, likes, and comments. And from that, we can sort of infer like where we think emojis fit into this, and I'll just kind of write it in. So if there's 5 likes for every comment, again, I think comment is the most meaningful piece of engagement, and likes is views are the least meaningful, or sort of the lowest investment from the user, and likes are somewhere in the middle. I would say that emojis are somewhere in between likes and comments, because a like is just clicking a certain button, whereas an emoji you kind of have to think about what feeling you're going to express, which emoji you're going to choose, and is that really appropriate given the post. So I think within this ratio we could say that there's maybe 3 emojis for every 1 comment. So that would just be a place to start in terms of this ratio. And if we, I think it's somewhat of a guess. Maybe we iterate on it, but let's just go with that. And we'll say that this is our ratio, and from there we can then calculate an engagement score. So in this case, we would take the number of views and divide it by 25. We would take the number of likes and divide it by 5. The number of emojis divided by 3, and then we would just take the number of comments. So for a given post, or just from accumulation of all of the posts for some period of time, we could come up with this score that now includes emojis as part of our engagement metric. And a good way to test this is just to initially take emojis out and just use, so in this first example, we don't have emojis. This is just our baseline, right? This is what we calculate today without this feature. And if we had 125 views and we had 25 likes and 5 comments, we'd get a score, an engagement score of 15. So then if we then add in emojis in our second example, example B here, and we have the same number of views, but we now, let's say we have 5 fewer likes. Again, there's this hypothesis that emojis will decrease the likes and comments in some way. And so let's just say we take, there's 5 fewer likes in this case, but now we have 6 emojis, and we have 1 less comment. So we have 4 comments instead of 5, and we get the same engagement score. So we've now traded in some reasonable way, right? The number of a few likes and 1 comment, and for some emojis, and we have now some parity in our engagement scores. So this feels like a good baseline. Now, when we go out and we run, we add this feature to the product and run some tests, we can use this equation to measure the engagement. And we can measure posts, without emojis and with emojis, and come up with a apples to apples comparison of engagement scores. So to me, this feels like a useful measurement, at least to get started. And really the next step here in terms of where we're at here is this, proof would be revealed through applying this in this experiment loop. So we have our measurements, we have a hypothesis, and we have some idea of like the data types, right? The data and how we're going to collect it. And so now we need really just to build something and test it. And not that that's trivial, but not something I'm going to do on the whiteboard. I think the key part here is that we're taking something from this customer need, right? These emotions, these emojis, and that goes into our MVP, and that our hypothesis is also informing our MVP. So what we build when we sit down with our designers should, this feature should reflect whatever emotions, whichever emojis we think are the ones worth testing, and we come up with a couple different versions, a couple different designs, and we work with our developers to build some simple, workable versions of this, which we can then deploy to a small set of customers, and in small in Facebook sense might be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions. For you, it could be a much smaller number, but it needs to be a meaningful number. But your hypothesis is also driving this, what you're building here, because you in your designs, you want to come up with, again, we're coming up with different variations. Maybe some variations only include emojis, some include, big emojis, some include small ones, some include a big like button, a small like button. Maybe in some you remove the comments altogether. So you can start to get a better idea of how these different engagement types relate to each other through the customer experience. So you're not just putting them all necessarily in one version and just seeing what they use. You may hide them, you may emphasize certain features and de-emphasize them, and then measure what impact that has on engagement. So that essentially then becomes your MVP, or at least some initial set of versions that you're going to A/B test, and you're going to have to just prioritize what those things are, and then you measure them, take the data, and then you look at them, and then determine, did this validate our hypothesis or not? And in reality, it may take a couple tests, right, to get some clear validation on your hypothesis. But in a lot of cases, you may be wrong, and you just need to rewrite or rethink your hypothesis. Or again, if this is a much longer list of hypotheses, you may see that the one you're really kind of focused on isn't really the one that's being kind of revealed through the testing process. So in a nutshell, that's it. I think ultimately you're looking for fit here, right? So if you validate your hypothesis, then meaning you've been able to create some version of the emoji feature which is improving your engagement score, then you have some evidence of fit. Now maybe there's more work to be done, but you have initial proof enough to at least substantiate or validate that you should spend more time and energy on this feature. So that's basically it for now. And then as we move on, we will deal with this siren. Okay, that's it for this exercise. I hope you found it useful. Again, the idea is just to kind of keep it simple, focus on these major steps, and really it's meant to be something that anyone in the organization can do. Although to do it repeatedly, I do recommend hiring a product manager who's very experienced in lean startup, so that you can systematically kind of go through a process like this on a regular basis. If you have any comments or feedback or ideas, please leave them in the comments. I will also add links to some valuable resources, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.